gonna hang up on you then.
All right, well, I think we're live, guys.
All right.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very important webinar. My name is Danielle Harris. I am the WIAC Commissioner. And tonight we are going to bring you all of the information and the information on what you need to know to get registered and make sure that you are a participant in this year's election. So at this time, I would like to first of all thank the Wisconsin Elections Commission for partnering with us tonight and providing the education for all of our WIAC student athletes, coaches, administrators, and fans. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Riley Wilmot and Aaron Hogue as they give us their presentation about voting in the state of Wisconsin.
All right, well, thank you very much, Danielle, and thank you everyone for attending. We're really excited to have this opportunity to speak to folks about voting in Wisconsin and kind of some of the ins and outs on how you can participate in this fall's election. So, a little bit about our agenda today. We're going to start with introducing ourselves, kind of giving a little bit of information, but then we're going to dive right into some of the more specific election-related topics. So things like voter registration, photo ID, voting absentee and or in-person voting, the differences and the different processes for both, and then ultimately becoming a poll worker. Because that is something that we are really focusing on, both as an organization and a state, to try to make sure that we're bringing in new folks into the election process, having a little bit more help with our within our communities to put on the election, and also more importantly for some folks, getting paid to be participating in the election process, which is always kind of a nice little thing. So we'll get into it. My name is Riley. I've been with the Elections Commission now for a little under 3 years. Some of the work that I do there is I work with voter outreach. So talking to organizations like WEAC, talking to organizations that promote voting within their community, as well as giving a little information and guidance to our county and municipal clerks throughout Wisconsin. We're also joined today by my colleague, Erin Hogue. I'll have her introduce herself here right now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin. I just started at the Wisconsin Elections Commission a week and a half ago. So I'm still learning what my job is. I am a UW grad, though. I went to Madison for undergrad and grad school. I was not a student athlete, club sports, but not any of the official sports.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Erin. We're happy to have you here on this webinar. And then next, we've got some of our WEAC representatives. So Brooke Wellhausen, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Brooke Wellhausen. I am our WIAC SAC president. I attend UW Stevens Point and I run cross country and track and field.
All right, perfect. And then finally, we have Devontae Amos.
Hello, everyone. My name is Devontae Amos. I am a football student athlete from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. I also serve as our WEAC National SAC representative, representing not only the WEAC, but also the College Conference of Illinois and Wisconsin. I'm super happy to be here and take part.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Brooke and Devontae, for agreeing to help out with this presentation. They're going to be taking some of the questions that you guys may have, either through the webinar itself or through the Facebook feed. So if you do have any questions about a topic relating to elections or maybe a specific slide that we're on, feel free to either comment or utilize the chat function, and we'll have both Brooke and Devontae kind of pitching some of those questions out to us as we go along. All right. So first of all, what is the Wisconsin Elections Commission? So the Wisconsin Elections Commission is the agency tasked with administering the state election laws in Wisconsin. So we do this by trying to enhance representative democracy by ensuring the integrity of the electoral process. Essentially, that's a really fancy way of saying we are making sure that all of our elections are open, that they're fair, that they're impartial, and most importantly, that they're trusted. because that is something that's popped up a ton in the news, whether it's due to election security issues, whether it's due to misinformation, whatever the reason. We are really here to make sure that we can promote that we as a nonpartisan government organization can be the trusted official source of election information. By law, we cannot be partisan. By law, we have to provide just the guidance of what the laws in the books are, and really try to find ways that we can help folks participate in the election process and the guidelines of those laws. Okay, section 1, we're going to go into voter qualifications and the registration process. So I am going to turn this one over to Erin, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what is needed to become a registered Wisconsin voter.
Yeah, so if you want to vote in Wisconsin, I mean, there's some things that are probably pretty consistent in every state. You do need to be a US citizen, and you need to be 18 years or older. In Wisconsin, you do also need to have lived in the district where you're going to be voting for at least 28 consecutive days before the election. For most of you, if you got onto campus, probably in September, some of you even the middle of August, you're set, right? You've already been there for 28 consecutive days. You also need to not be disqualified from voting. And there's a couple different ways you can get disqualified from voting. Be convicted of a felony and still be serving the terms of your sentence. And that does include parole and probation. If you have been deemed incompetent, or if you've ever placed a bet or wager on an outcome of an election, that can get you disqualified from voting. There's a couple other things. Other qualified electors can be military personnel away from their Wisconsin residence. So if any of you are in ROTC and for whatever reason got deployed, I don't know how frequently that happens, or the reserves, right? And you're over on a base or you're sent somewhere else, that would apply. An overseas voter who lived in Wisconsin before going overseas, and their kids who are 18 or older, can all vote in Wisconsin. If you're a former resident of one town and you've moved into a different one less than 28 days before the election, you would need to vote in the town that you lived in before. And if you're a former Wisconsin resident, and you can't vote in the state that you've moved to yet for some reason. So like, let's say you move to a state where, I don't know, they have like a 60-day residence qualification. You can still vote, but you can only vote for president. So you'd be voting absentee for Wisconsin, you'd be voting for president. And then a new resident who's just moved to Wisconsin less than 28 consecutive days before the election can also only vote for president. Now, again, I'm not sure how much that really applies to students, right? Because we understand that students come from out of state. But again, if most of you got to your campuses in August or September, you've been here for 28 days anyway. All right. And then for residency, so you can only vote in one municipality. So you can't vote multiple times in the place where you used to live and where you live in Wisconsin, right? So you pick one and you only vote in that place. Residency is determined by your physical presence in this space, but again, with students, that's sort of a fuzzy area, right? If you came from a different town in Wisconsin and you moved to where you are on campus, you can either vote where you are on campus or you can vote in your hometown absentee. Keep in mind, you can't vote in both, obviously. It's not lost when you leave home and go to another location temporarily if you're planning to go home, which is why for students it applies. You can either vote absentee for home or you can vote on campus. And then once residency is established, you can be temporarily absent from your residency. It's still considered a resident as long as you intend to come back to it. So if you do decide to vote on campus and you know you're going to be coming back the next year, if you leave for the summer, that doesn't do anything to your residency. Your student status can't be used as a factor in determining your residency. So you can choose to establish your residency, again, either in your hometown or where you're going to school. And just keep in mind, again, that you can only vote in one election in one municipality. So just, yeah, you can't vote absentee for home and vote where you are going to school. There's a couple different places you can register to vote. One of the options is to vote on myvote.wi.gov. It goes really quickly, and if you have a smartphone or any way of uploading an image of your photo ID, it's a really nice, handy, quick way, very user-friendly to register to vote. You do need to have a Wisconsin driver's license or ID. That's actually you can use a student ID now as well. The trick is it needs to have your date of birth on it, in addition to your face, obviously a photo of your face. And then you would want either a receipt that you purchased it to go with that, or the school should submit a housing list saying that you are in fact, or proof of enrollment. So if for some reason your ID is expired, you can use a proof of enrollment in classes to help supplement that.
Yeah, and the big thing that I would just add here is with registering to vote on the My Vote Wisconsin website, you are able to do this. It says on here you need to have a Wisconsin driver license or ID. That's for you to register entirely online. If you do not have a Wisconsin driver license or state ID, you still can register to vote. That is not a requirement. It is just a common document that folks have. When you talk about maybe using the My Vote Wisconsin website and you don't have a Wisconsin driver's license or ID, kind of like Aaron said, there are still multiple other documents that you can use. This just would require you to fill out the form online, print it out, and then either mail it to your municipal clerk or drop it off at your municipal clerk's office. Both are still options, and we'll kind of go into those deadlines a little bit later on when you can still register in person versus registering online, because the My Vote Wisconsin website will, by law, have to shut down on October 21st. This really is a great tool that you can visit. I encourage everyone, if they're curious about voting in Wisconsin, even if they are very adamant about being registered at their home address versus their campus address, or going to their polling place to handle all their voting needs, which is still an option, I still definitely encourage you to check out the My Vote Wisconsin website. It's a very easy, very intuitive website to use, has a ton of information on there. And we'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but it can show you who's going to be on your ballot, so you can do some research ahead of time to find out candidates that you might want to support. I can show you exactly where your polling place is and even directions to that polling place from your home address or wherever you may be. It also shows some in-person absentee options. So this is something where maybe you don't want to vote on election day, but you also don't want to vote absentee and mail or drop off your absentee ballot. You actually want to go and get the ballot in person. It's got some of those locations and hours in there too. So it's a great tool. I highly encourage you to check it out. It's just really been a great help with elections in Wisconsin. All right, and now we're going to get into a little bit more of what you need to register. So as Aaron kind of started with, the easiest way to get registered, frankly, is on the My Vote Wisconsin website, but you can still register by mail at the clerk's office or on election day. So we still have all of those options available to every single Wisconsinite. And to do this, this is going to require the voter to fill out a voter registration application and also provide a valid form of proof of residence. So this is a little bit what the voter registration application looks like. It starts at the very top, letting folks know what the qualifications are to get registered. So making sure that they're a citizen, having resided in the area for at least 28 consecutive days, or at least 18 years old, and not serving a felony sentence. Then it goes into some of the more basic information, making sure that we get your name, your date of birth, the address where you live, because where you vote and what your ballot looks like depends on where you live. It also gathers some kind of more helpful information, like if you have a different mailing address, if you live in a rural area, or have a PO box, some prior registration information to help make sure we're cleaning up our rolls. A little area to ask about identification, because it is, you are required to provide some of that information, your proof of residence, and then eventually signing your registration. The nice thing that happens is a lot of these forms are mailed out to folks either by third-party groups, nonpartisan voter organizations, schools. Your school most likely will have some version of this form available online or on your student portal. And in addition, it is always available online at the My Vote Wisconsin website. Now, when I said in here, you've got to fill out the application, you also need a proof of residence document. So what exactly can that proof of residence document be? It's a pretty common document. It doesn't need to be one specific item. Essentially what it needs to have is it needs to have a complete name. It needs to have your first and last name at a minimum. It can't have your middle name. If it doesn't, that's no worries. It also needs to have a complete and current residential address. And a good thing to note, we'll go into some of the different types of proof of residence that you can submit, but electronic proof of residence is acceptable. So say maybe you don't get your utility bill mailed to you. That's very common these days. If you just can pull that up in your email or even print off a screenshot, that is acceptable. So in all of the different versions that I'll go into here, you can go ahead and use an electronic form. That's totally fine. All right, so some of the more common forms of proof of residence is an unexpired Wisconsin driver license or state ID card. The important note with this is that if you're registering in person, it does need to have the correct address printed on there. If you're registering online, our system only looks at what the DMV has on file. So sometimes, it's very common to move around, especially when you're in school. And if you are no longer at the address that's printed on your driver license, you can still use that to get registered to vote. You just have to update your driver license address with the Wisconsin DMV. It's a very easy process, totally free. You can do it online. It takes a couple minutes at the most. But let's say you don't have a Wisconsin driver license or state ID card and you still want to get registered to vote here. You can use any other official or government issued ID card that has your name and your address. One that's a little more uncommon is you can have any ID card that's issued by your employer during the normal course of business, but it can't be a business card. There's a little difference. It has to be something that's actually issued as an ID card for your employer. We don't see too many of these, but it is something that is specified in state law that you can use. Now, the more common ones that folks can use are a university, college, or tech college ID. So this one gets a little bit more complex depending on where you go to school, because some university, college, or tech college IDs aren't necessarily compliant right off the bat, but all UW system schools do provide photo ID compliant IDs that you can get. A lot of these groups a lot of these schools, you can get these right off their student portal. You can print off a version. Student unions will often print one completely free of charge. It's something that you're going to want to check out for your specific institution on where you can get the photo ID or the compliant voter card to use to get registered or to vote as your photo ID. But this university, college, or tech college ID, it's got to have the photo, and it must be accompanied by a fee receipt dated within the last 9 months, or that the institution provides a certified housing list to the municipal clerk. This certified housing list is for folks that are living in university housing and are wanting to vote at their polling place on election day. So if you're voting absentee or you would like to go down that route, here are some other things I would suggest that are extremely common too. A utility bill. It has to be a recent one, so it has to be issued within the past 90 days. But again, printed copies or electronic statements are totally acceptable, and you can show those electronically as well. A copy of a residential lease. The big thing for this is you shouldn't mail in your lease. It's kind of an important document to retain on file, so you will have to show that to the clerk in person. A bank or credit card statement. So this can include, like I said, credit card statements, mortgage statements, retail credit card statements. So if you have something from, a Target credit card or Kohl's or something like that, you could totally use that. It doesn't have to be, like a Amex or Discover card. It can be any type of bank or credit card statement. And ultimately, the last one, this is if it's kind of, nerdy to say, my favorite form of proof of residence, because who doesn't love government documents, is a check or document issued by a unit of government. So this means any unit of government. It could be state, federal, municipal, county. It could be even your university, since if you are enrolled in a UW system school, anything from the UW that from your school that has your name and your address, that's good to use for proof of residence. We kind of throw out the one that kind of throws people for a loop. We've had folks that get registered with a letter from a foreign consulate or embassy that has their name and their Wisconsin address. Totally fine. A foreign consulate is considered a unit of government. So a lot of these, if folks are having trouble finding a document to use to get registered, this document issued by a unit of government truly is the best catch-all for you. Okay, do we have any questions about proof of residence? If not, we will just go right into the photo ID. Okay, so photo ID, this is what you are going to use to actually get your ballot. So sometimes people kind of conflate proof of residence and photo ID. They can be the same document, but they're really doing two separate roles. Proof of residence shows where you reside within the state. It proves what your address is to show that you should be voting in Wisconsin. Your proof of ID, on the other hand, really shows who you are, just to verify that you are the only one who is voting for yourself. So what do photo IDs need? All photo IDs must contain a name, a picture, and a date of expiration. The name on the photo ID must conform to the name that you're registered under. Now, that being said, it doesn't need to be the exact name. So we kind of throw down here, if someone's legal name is Susan, but they typically go by Sue, and on their driver license or their student ID, it says Sue or, Sarah or, whatever, as long as it gets close to the name, Bob for Robert, Tom for Thomas, etc. Just got to be close. The photo on the photo ID should reasonably resemble the voter. So this doesn't need to be something that is an identical match. As long as you reasonably resemble it, people grow their hair out, get facial hair, lose weight, whatever, it can alter that picture or, how you present a little bit differently. That's okay. Your photo ID will still work. And again, the photo ID must be unexpired, but this is kind of the tricky part. There are some exceptions with this, specifically with using your student ID, and we'll get into that here. So photo ID or proof of identification is required from all voters except for confidential voters. And confidential voters are folks that are typically enrolled in a Department of Justice program. So it's very rare, there aren't too many people who that applies to. So here's some more common acceptable types of proof of residence. And these either have to be unexpired or they can be expired after the last general election. So that was November 6th of 2018. As long as your ID has expired after that, you'll be good to go for this November. So some common ones that are used are Wisconsin driver license or Wisconsin state issued ID card. Something to note here is it has to be issued by the state of Wisconsin. It cannot be an out-of-state driver license or an out-of-state ID. It does need to come from the Wisconsin Department of Motor Vehicles. Military ID can be used. Another common form for folks is a passport. It can either be your passport book, more commonly held, or it can be that passport card that also is issued. Some other types of proof of identification is a university, college, or tech college photo ID that is unexpired. If it is unexpired, it does not require a proof of enrollment document. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky if you're trying to use your student ID for all of your voting purposes. If you're already registered to vote, great, cool. We got through that hoop already. This now we're just trying to prove who you are. If you have your college ID, as long as it's unexpired, that's all you need. You don't need anything else because you've already registered to vote. You're just trying to prove who you are now. That being said, if it is expired, that's okay. You can actually still use that. You just need to show that you're still enrolled in the school. So say your college ID expired back in 2017. So it's before the 2018 general election, so it's a little old. That's okay. You can actually still use that one. It's the one type of ID that has some pretty significant exemptions for its expiration date. Just because you need to just show something that you are still enrolled. So this can be a class schedule, tuition receipt, even a letter from the school. Again, in your student portals, it's a little different for each institution, but you should be able to print off something showing that you are currently enrolled in that institution. And again, just to kind of make sure, you should check to see if the more commonly issued ID from your university or college is photo ID compliant. So it's got to have That expiration date on there, it's got to have your signature. So sometimes we run into this mostly with like University of Madison. They have the WISC card that is not photo ID compliant, but they will issue a photo ID compliant ID that you can pick up for free at their student unions. So say maybe you don't have any of those, or they're just not accessible. That's all right. You can still get you can still vote using a couple other documents. So if you're a new citizen, you could use your certificate of naturalization. It just has to be issued within the past 2 years. You can also use a receipt for a driver license or state ID card from the state of Wisconsin. So if you just went and got your license changed over, they're not going to give you that physical card anymore. They're actually going to just give you that paper printout, but that paper printout will work totally fine for your photo ID. Something else that I'd like to note in here is that you can get a Wisconsin state ID for free. If you just let them know that it's for voting purposes, the DMV will not charge you. There are some documents that you need to bring, to show that you live within the state, that you're who you are. But if you don't have those documents, so say maybe something like a birth certificate or your social security card, it's at home or it's just not with you at your campus address, that's okay. You can actually still go get a photo ID for Wisconsin without any of those documents. It's called the ID petition process. And again, that's entirely free. And that's a great option for folks that want to vote in Wisconsin, they just don't have a photo ID, and they might be missing some of the necessary documents needed to get like a driver license or a state ID card. It's only valid for 60 days, but if you get that now, that will definitely last you up to Election Day. You can also use a Veteran Affairs photo ID as long as it's issued by the VA or the Federal Department of Veteran Affairs. And if you are a member of a recognized Wisconsin tribe, you can use your tribal ID as well. And here are just some photos of some commonly used photo IDs. So you can see, the Wisconsin driver, state ID, or IDPP receipt, just going to be that sheet of paper. That is totally acceptable to use for photo ID. And then down here, of course, we have the University College or Tech College ID. This is something that just was changed, where if it's not expired, you don't need that enrollment verification. So that's what you're seeing on there. It says student ID plus enrollment verification. Again, that's only if your ID has been or is expired. You just need to show you're still currently enrolled. But if it's not expired and it is the photo ID compliant card, you can go ahead and use that. You don't need anything else. So let's say you still want to vote in Wisconsin, you don't have a photo ID, but it's election day. What do you do? Well, the good news is you actually still can participate in the election. What you'll do is it's called provisional voting, and it's a pretty unique situation. The first one pops up very rarely. Essentially, that just means that when you are getting registered to vote on election day and you have a Wisconsin driver license or a state ID and you are unwilling to provide that ID number. We don't see that too often. I think it's in my 3 years working for the commission, it's popped up once. So it's pretty rare. What's more common is that second bullet where if a voter is unable or unwilling to present acceptable photo ID on election day. So say, stuff piles up, you've got a lot of exams, you got a lot of homework, whatever, you can't make it to get a photo ID, that's fine. You can still vote on election day. You'll just vote a provisional ballot, and then you'll have to go to your clerk's office by that Friday. So you've got a couple days to go get a photo ID, show that to the municipal clerk, and have that ballot count. All right, any questions about photo ID?
There is one thing I wanted to mention. We did hear from a clerk in Menominee, so that's UW Stout, that students were taking photos of their student IDs in case they lost them between now and election day. Good for you for being proactive, but you actually have to have the physical photo ID when you go to vote. The photo on your phone of your photo ID is not going to count. So if you take that image from your phone in, you're probably going to end up with a provisional ballot as opposed to getting your ballot done all the way. So just be aware of that. Yeah, taking a photo of your ID isn't going to work for you.
Good point. Thank you very much, Erin, because yeah, that is true. It's the process of photo ID and proof of residence get conflated all the time because of situations like this of proof of residence. You can show your proof of residence on your phone electronically. but photo ID, entirely separate process. Like Aaron said, that does need to show the actual ID when you go and vote. All right. Well, let's move on to section 3 that goes into absentee and in-person voting and the differences between those and how you can do those. So absentee voting. So this is where you can have the ability to vote from anywhere. Absentee voting is a situation where if you are unable or unwilling to show up to your polling place on election day, you can still vote. Wisconsin is a no excuse absentee state, so it honestly, you don't need any reason to vote absentee. It is a choice that all voters have. And we want to let folks know about absentee voting to see if it's a good fit for them. So when I say it's voting, the ability to vote from anywhere, it truly is anywhere. So what happens is it is the exact same ballot that you would vote at your polling place, except what the clerk does is they either mail it out to your address, wherever you may be, or you go into either their office or a satellite location before election day and just vote there. This is a really great option for students who are on campus, but maybe still want to vote at their home address. Either that's where they're registered and they don't want to update their registration. Maybe they have a local contest that they're really interested in back home. That's great. You don't necessarily have to schlep all the way back to your home. You can just vote absentee. So how do you do this? You do this by requesting an absentee ballot. The clerk isn't going to know if you want to vote absentee unless you tell them that's how you want to vote. So you can request this even now. We do put on here, it is better to request your ballot sooner rather than later because it does take time for your clerk to prepare your ballot and mail it out to you. It takes a couple days in between there, so it's always better to get that knocked off your to-do list sooner. But you do have until at least October 29th. Now, October 29th is cutting it extremely, extremely close. This is the legal deadline. However, I definitely do not encourage you to wait until the 29th to request your absentee ballot. Because also it's really easy to request an absentee ballot. Again, you can do it right on MyVote. So once you're registered to vote, or maybe it's been 5 minutes or 5 years that you've been registered to vote, great. Head on over to myvote.wi.gov. There is a little button right at the very top that says vote absentee, and you'll be walked through the entire absentee ballot process. All you have to do is tell them a little bit of information about yourself so they can pull up your voter record. You can tell them what address you want your absentee ballot mailed to. And then if this is your first time voting absentee, you do have to submit just a picture or copy of your photo ID. So again, another one of those weird caveats where if you're voting in person, kind of like what Aaron said with the UW Stout, you still got to show the original ID. If you're doing it through absentee, a copy is acceptable. We found a lot of folks when they are requesting their absentee ballot, it's really easy to do on your smartphone. Our website was meant for mobile, so it is quick and easy to pull up on your phone. You can take a picture of your driver license or your student ID or your passport, whatever it may be. You can securely upload it to our server on the website, and then your clerk can issue out your absentee ballot, sometimes even the same day. It's a very, very quick process. But maybe this isn't how you want to do it. That's fine. There are other ways that you can go ahead and do it. You can request an absentee ballot entirely by email. You can head to MyVote again to find your clerk's contact information. But you can shoot them a quick email. What we suggest is, again, letting them know your name, the address where you're registered to vote, the address where you want your ballot mailed to if it's different than the address where you're registered to vote, and then a copy of your photo ID as well. And ultimately, if emailing your clerk or MyVote are not an option for you, that's okay. We've got a third option for you too. You can complete an absentee ballot request, just physically print one off of our website, or there are a ton of different requests available, or different forms, I should say, available online, and just returning that to your municipal clerk, either by dropping it off or mailing it into their office. And if you ultimately decide that voting absentee is not the option you want to go down, that's all right. You can still vote on election day. So election day this year is on November 3rd. Your polling places are going to be open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. You can stop in there anytime in between. Something that is very important that I like to let students who are voting on campus know is sometimes there can be a rush right at the very end. As long as you are in line by 8 p.m., you're allowed to vote. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of people who are excited about the election this year. We expect high turnout. There might be some lines. As long as you are in line by 8 p.m., you still will be able to vote. So if it's getting close, you're wondering if you should vote or not, and you decide you do want to vote, just make sure you're there by 8 p.m. You'll be able to get through. If you're wondering where your polling place is, again, I'm kind of a broken record. Check myvote.wi.gov. It's a great way to find out where you can vote on election day, and even give you directions if maybe you're new to your city and you're wondering where something is. It's hooked into Google Maps. It's super easy to use. And the important thing with voting on election day is you should bring your photo ID, because again, they're going to need to see that physical copy. Something that I didn't really go into here as well, but this is something a lot of people are concerned about when it comes to voting in person this year, is clerks have put in a lot of steps to make sure that the polling places are as safe as possible due to COVID-19. So your polling places will have things like masks available for voters. You know, it depends on the polling place, but they may have that available. They'll have sanitized pens for folks to use, so you're not touching a pen that someone else already touched. They'll have hand sanitizer there for you to use before you go into the polling place and after you leave, and multiple signs and setups encouraging social distancing. So just really making sure that folks are staying as healthy as possible. We consult with our public health experts before every election to make sure there's no updated guidance that we're missing. And then we distill that information down to the municipal clerks, so that way they can implement it in their polling places on election day. But however you vote, whether in person or at the polling place on election day or absentee, we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need. So again, head to MyVote. No matter what your plan is for this fall, it can help you figure out how you're going to vote. All right, well, let's get into the final section. So this is how to become a poll worker. So our elections only work if we have folks actually working them. So poll workers are the folks that will be assisting voters on election day. They're the ones who show up to make sure that people get issued the ballots. They're the ones who make sure that folks know how to use some of the accessible voting equipment. They're the ones who are there at the end of the night actually counting the ballots and printing off some of the results tapes from our tabulators. So what does it take to become a poll worker? Well, some of the qualifications is they must be fluent in English. That's one. Another one is live within Wisconsin. So this is something that recently was changed. It used to be that you had to work at a polling place within your specific county. So, you know, I live here in Madison, so I could only work within Dane County. I couldn't help over in Sauk County or Columbia or wherever. That has changed due to a court decision. So now you can work wherever as long as you live within the state of Wisconsin. You can't be a candidate for office, but a nice thing about this is it can be a paid position, or it can be work for volunteer hours. You know, you might be a part of another group where you need to get in service hours. This is something that you can always work out with the clerk as well, where you get compensated maybe in those service hours instead of being paid. But very commonly, it is a paid position. This pay, it depends on exactly where you work, what specific city, town, or village, but typically we see it fall anywhere between the range of about $10 an hour to there are some municipalities that, because of, you know, some grants or, you know, however they're funding it, upwards of like $20 an hour to work at the polls for election day. So it's a great way to learn about the process. It's a great way to potentially earn a little bit of extra cash or to get some of those volunteer hours in. So if you do become a poll worker, what are some of those different roles that you may have? So a poll worker is officially called an election inspector, and election inspectors are the most commonly held role on election day. The election inspectors are the ones, like I said, they're making sure that folks are in the right lines. They're checking people in at the poll book to make sure that they're at the right polling place. They're looking at photo IDs. They're helping issue the ballots. They're helping people put their ballot into the voting equipment. But in charge of all of those election inspectors is one person. That person is called the chief inspector. Typically, this is someone who is a little bit more seasoned. Maybe they have a couple elections underneath their belt. There is a specific training that you can take. It's about 2.5 to 3 hours long, but it's entirely free, entirely online. And something else to note is typically chief inspectors do get paid a little bit more on election day, just because there are additional roles and responsibilities that they have. Another role that folks have is the election registration official, or an ERO. The ERO is someone who only works in registration. This is a commonly held position for folks who maybe are working at a larger election like this November and are wanting to help out for the first time. So really, what they're tasked with is helping folks fill out that voter registration form, looking at the proof of residence, making sure that it has some of those most commonly held things like, your name, an updated address, maybe checking some of those issue dates if they're using like a utility bill, etc. It's a great way to help. It's pretty easy to learn, and it's a really rewarding form as well, because most of the time you're helping people register for the first time, so they're excited to vote. They're usually folks, probably if you're in university around the same age as you, so it's a good role to have. There's also greeters and tabulators. So these are people who are kind of helping either manage the line, so making sure folks are getting into the right line, whether the poll book might be split up between names, or making sure that you're in the right spot. There might be multiple polling places in one building, so maybe they'll help you get routed to another room if that's where you need to go. Tabulators are folks that help at the end of the night. They are the ones who are counting the votes. They're making sure that everything adds up, that the number of voters that came through the polling place on election day matches the number of ballots that have been cast. And then that last role is election helpers. The election helpers, it's kind of a catch-all position. These are the folks that are really filling in wherever they need the most help. Something that they've really helped with lately is sanitization of the polling place. So going through, making sure that they're wiping down commonly touched surfaces, making sure that pens are being sanitized, that folks, if they have extra masks, they can hand them out to folks, or I should say face coverings, making sure that they're ready to go. Really, they're kind of just the fill-in. They'll help out wherever the chief inspector or the poll worker needs to be. So if you're someone that really likes to learn a lot of new tasks, wants to know a lot, a little bit about a lot of things, is willing to kind of switch up what you're doing, the election helper position is a great one for you. So maybe this is interesting, you want to participate in the election, you want to help out, you maybe want to earn some service hours, or potentially even earn a little bit of money. How do you become a poll worker? So the first way that you do it is by contacting your municipal clerk. So the municipal clerk for the town, village, or city where you want to help out is the person who's going to be hiring you. You can find this out by going to myvote.wi.gov/mymunicipalclerk. There's also a section on there. You'll be able to find it pretty easy, but you just have to contact your clerk either by mail, email, calling them up, letting them know that you're interested. Clerks right now are actively recruiting people, so it's frankly very easy to become a poll worker right now, just because they really need a lot of folks to help out with this election. Like I said, we expect it to be a high turnout election, and they're looking for extra people to help out, because there are also some poll workers who have helped out in the past who maybe aren't able to. Maybe they have, they're unable to due to COVID-19. Maybe they just physically aren't able to anymore. Maybe they're out of town. There are a lot of reasons why someone who's worked a lot in the past isn't able to work this fall. So clerks are really looking for folks from, younger generations to step up and take a role in their elections by serving as a poll worker. So I highly encourage you to contact your municipal clerk to figure out what opportunities are available. Typically what happens after you get hired as a poll worker for election day is you'll attend some sort of training. There are some in-person opportunities. It does depend on what your municipal clerk has set up, but more commonly, folks are getting transitioned to online training. You can take it whenever it fits your schedule, and it can be either covering all of the roles on election day, or it can be super specific. There are some municipal clerks that will say you are going to be an election registration official or an ERO. You only need to know about registration. So all I want you to do is watch this quick little video about what it needs to be to become registered to vote in Wisconsin. It's really up to you how much or how specific you want your training to be. And then the schedule. The clerk, again, is in charge of scheduling you on election day. This isn't necessarily the full day. Like I said, your polling place is open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Traditionally, clerks get there and leave about an hour. They kind of book in an extra hour on both sides. But if that doesn't fit with your schedule, they might have half-day options available where you can either just do it in the morning or do it in the afternoon. That's very common. So a lot of the time, a clerk will be able to kind of fit your schedule with what their schedule is for election day and figure out how to best use your help. All right, so how do you serve? You attend an election day training, you can read the manual that they'll provide with you, and then again, work with the clerk, figure out how many folks are going to be involved. Are you going to be a greeter? Are you going to be an ERO, that end of line officer? So again, kind of where I talked about, if you're getting close to the end of election day at 8 p.m. and you want to vote, you just need to be in line, because what's going to happen is someone who's working at the polls will go and actually stand behind you to signify everyone in front of me was in line and can vote. Eventually, they'll ask you to kind of visit your polling place and familiarize yourself with the ballot and the equipment. You can look at the ballot online, that's already there. You can kind of do a little bit of research about the piece of voting equipment that you're using. But again, if your clerk says, I only want you to focus on line management or voter registration or working the poll book, this is something that you might not have to worry about. It really does depend on what the clerk has scheduled for you. And then of course, on election day, just like with anything else, since it starts at 7 a.m., they'll probably expect to be there a little bit before that. But again, if you're doing like a half day, just go in whenever the clerk tells you that you need to be there. All right, well, unless there are any questions about this, we definitely want to open this up. So if you have any questions about the election process, about some of the stuff that we discussed, anything about the upcoming election, feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to answer some of those questions here live.
Brooke and Devontae, did you have any questions from your student athletes or from your fellow teammates?
Yes, I actually had a couple. The first one was a couple student athletes have already pre-registered back in their hometown in a different state. And so they were just wondering, is it possible if they can re-register in the state that they currently go to school in, or since they have already registered previously back at home, are they only allowed to cast that ballot back in their hometown?
So they can get registered here in Wisconsin as long as they live here and have lived here for at least 28 days. It really is up to the voter to determine where they want to vote, especially college students. Wisconsin law creates a kind of special area for you guys because, it's very common that you might only be on your campus address for, 9-10 months. So you can either be registered at your home address, back where, your mom or your dad may live, or you can get registered at school. If you're from another state and just going to school in Wisconsin, you are eligible to get registered here and vote here. The big thing to note is just you can't vote in two different states. So, if you're wanting to vote, maybe there's a specific race or contest in another state that you're interested in, or maybe you've already submitted your absentee ballot for another state, you might just want to stay registered back at your home address as opposed to getting registered here in Wisconsin, because again, you just want to make sure you're not voting in multiple states.
And then just a follow-up question to that, for those students who choose to vote in Wisconsin but are from another state, the easiest and most efficient way for them to do that would be via absentee ballot, correct? Instead of the in-person voting on election day?
Yeah, it really is up to their situation. So, if it's a student that is wanting to get registered at their campus address, really voting absentee or voting in person, both are going to be an easy process for them. Absentee becomes a little bit more of a convenient factor when, say, you aren't close to the address where you're registered to vote. So maybe if you're from, maybe you're from the Milwaukee area, but you're going to school up in Eau Claire. That drive from Eau Claire to Milwaukee it's pretty significant. So, and you can definitely make that drive. That's totally fine. But you can also just request the absentee ballot, where they will mail you your ballot, you fill it out, and then you just send it right back in the mail. But it is pretty specific to whatever your situation is. And I'll kind of put a plug here. If you have maybe a unique voting situation, or you're just not sure where you can be registered to vote, or what to do if you want to vote absentee or in person, definitely reach out to either our office at the Wisconsin Elections Commission or to your local municipal clerk. They'd be more than happy to help you kind of parse out your specific situation and figure out an individual path that you can take to get registered and vote the way that you'd like to.
Brooke, did you have any questions?
That was actually one of my questions from teammates as well, so that helped.
Riley, I got a question for you.
Sure.
Say for instance, I'm a senior or a fifth year senior at one of our institutions, and I know I'm already registered because I voted in the midterm elections. I voted in 2018. Where can I go to make sure that I can check the status to make sure I haven't been purged from the polls, so that I can make sure that I'm still registered, that I don't have to re-register? So where can I find that information?
Great question. So the best place to find that is myvote.wi.gov. Like I said, I kind of sound like a broken record, but that really is the one-stop shop for figuring out all your voting information. So on My Vote, there's a little area that says My Voter Information. You can click into that. It'll ask you for, I believe, your name and your date of birth, because this will pull up your individual voter record, and it will tell you not only if you're registered to vote or not, but also where you're registered to vote, because that's another important thing. Each time you move, you have to update your registration. So even if, say you go to school in Stevens Point, if you move from one apartment to another, or from one dorm room to another, you do have to update your registration. So this is a great way to confirm it. It's always a lot easier to take that 5 seconds while you've got the time, in between classes, or while you're thinking about the election after you see a campaign commercial online or on the TV, to just confirm your registration. Make sure you're registered to vote, make sure that the address is correct, and if not, making sure that you can get registered online in minutes. It's a very easy process to do online through My Vote, or by going to your polling place on election day, because we still do have election day registration.
Thank you for that, Riley. Another question that I have, can you dispel some myths? What are some things you can and can't take into the voting booth with you on election day?
Yeah, you can basically take anything. I mean, the voting booth is really just a temporary spot where you're going to get your ballot, take your pen, mark your selections, and then eventually make your way over to the voting equipment to submit your ballot. Something that we run into a fair amount is people who are really excited about voting and they want to show people that they voted. And what they want to do is they want to take a picture of their voted ballot. We run into this issue a lot where folks either want to take a picture of the ballot, they want to take a picture of themselves with the ballot. That is against Wisconsin law. And it kind of gets into a gray area because it's not necessarily the picture that's against the law, it's more the sharing of that picture. But ultimately, what we suggest for folks, just to make sure they're not accidentally putting themselves into any issue or inadvertently violating election law, is to just refrain from using your cell phone in the polling place. It's totally fine if you are there, you're voting, there may be a race where you don't know too much about those candidates. It's okay to pull up on your phone and do a little bit of research there, something quick. You don't want to stay in the voting booth too long where you're backing folks up in line. But that's totally fine to do. And frankly, if you kind of want to avoid that situation of having to do your research right at the polling place, you can always look up your ballot online before election day on My Vote, and do a little bit of that research before. So that way, when you go to the polling place, you kind of can spend a minimal amount of time there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So let's just recap a little bit. So first, we're going to use My Vote to confirm whether we are registered or not. And if we are not registered, we're going to register at My Vote. And what's the deadline again, Riley? October 21st?
So yes, the deadline to register online through My Vote is October 21st. However, if My Vote is not an option for you, you still can't get registered in your municipal clerk's office up until right before election day. And then of course you can always get registered to vote at your polling place on election day.
Okay.
So that's the important part with registration. When it comes to photo ID, really what matters is that you have that photo ID ready to go by the time that you vote. So either, you have it ready by the time that you are requesting your absentee ballot, if that's the path that you're going down, or if you want to go to your polling place, you have that ready to go, ready with you, the actual ID, not just a picture. Or if that's not an option, again, you still can go vote a provisional ballot at your polling place and then later show your photo ID. That process, it's a little bit more time restricted, so we definitely encourage you to get that photo ID before you head to your polling place. And there are always options to get a free photo ID from the Wisconsin DMV. So whether that's the free regular ID, that's totally fine to get, or whether that's the ID from the ID petition process, if you are missing certain documents like birth certificate, social security number, anything like that, you can still get a photo ID and vote in the state. And then once you have that already, it's time to make a plan to vote. So it's time to either request that absentee ballot or figure out where your polling place is and figuring out what time you're going to head there between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. Again, as long as you're in line by 8 p.m., you'll be able to vote. And then the nice thing afterwards too is you can track to see that your ballot was counted on election day. You can track that on the My Vote Wisconsin website. It usually takes the clerks a couple weeks just with as many ballots and as many people who go out and vote, but you can eventually check your participation to see that they checked you in on election day and that they were looking at that your vote was able to count.
All right, so for all my student athletes out there, you gotta have a game plan. You guys are used to planning for everything, so you gotta have a game plan. Not only should you have a game plan, but make sure that your teammates have a game plan as well. If you don't wanna go to the polling place yourself, make sure you take a friend with you. All right, and make sure when you go into that polling booth that you do not take a picture of your ballot. Instead, take a picture after you have voted with your voting sticker. All right. Yeah. And so that is what we are going to encourage you guys to do. Again, are there any questions from any of our webinar participants in the Q&A section of the webinar? Is there any other questions that we haven't covered? Again, this webinar is being recorded. It will be for playback on our Facebook page. So if you're missing some information and you weren't sure, you didn't quite catch something, or maybe you just hopped in late, you will be able to play the video back and get the information that you need. Brooke and Devontae, are there any other questions that you have?
Yeah, I just kind of thought of one last minute. I know that most of us are student athletes who have very busy schedules with academics and athletics. Is there a specific time limit or time frame? I know this can kind of be just different based on the polling place and how many people normally attend the show. But is there a specific time frame that we can expect to be at the polling place if we choose to vote on election day?
Good question. Good question. There really isn't one specific time frame. Clerks are really cognizant of trying to make sure that folks spend as little time in line as possible because frankly, no one's ever said, wow, that was a really fun line. So they want to make sure people are getting through the polling place. And especially due to COVID-19, they really want to minimize the amount of time someone spends in an enclosed area. Again, they've got all that, sanitization and health, public health best practices are following, but it can take a little bit longer this year just because of all of the sanitization that has to go into it. So again, this is where it's really important to make that plan to vote. So finding a chunk of time, even if it's maybe, anywhere from 30 minutes to a couple hours, you can just kind of find a slot of time to go and vote. And if you want to skip the line entirely, that might be the best, or absentee voting might be the best option for you. Absentee voting really puts the timetables in your favor. You get to choose when you complete your ballot. You get to choose when you send it in. As long as it gets to the clerk or it's postmarked by election day, you'll be good to go. But we really encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. And really what it boils down to, Danielle couldn't put it any better, make a plan for it. Once you make a plan to vote, you can look into the different tools or the different documents that you may need for it, figure out your game plan, where you're going to go, what time you're going to go, when works for your schedule. We really, really encourage folks to make this plan ahead of time, so that way they're not surprised on election day, or, you know, kind of rushing around trying to get all the documents they may need to go to the polling place on election.
Yes, plan, plan, plan. Make a plan, make a plan. All of you guys have cell phones. You have group chats that you're all in. If one person goes to the polls and they see that the lines are long, that means you need to call an audible. And you need to get yourself to the poll and make sure that you can vote and you're in line by the appropriate time on 8 o'clock that Tuesday, November 3rd. So please make sure that you have a plan. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the Wisconsin Elections Commission. They are there to help you. That is the primary purpose and function of their jobs, as well as your city clerks. I just like to again thank Riley and Aaron for providing us with so much information. A lot for us to digest, but it's in a very important year, and we all need to make sure that we participate and take our civic duty seriously this year. And again, thank you to our student athlete guests and panelists with us, Brooke and Devontae. Thank you so much for all that you guys are doing to make sure that you're spreading the message to your fellow student athletes. So I just wanted to thank everybody. Continue to stay safe. And again, we look forward to communicating with you all in the future.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Well, thank you guys. I stopped recording. So we should be, hold on, let me see if I hit